Hi there. Welcome to the show. Once again, I'm joined by Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos. Eric, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm wearing my mask, just like like Gavin Newsom doesn't want me to do.
Oh man, I'm looking at the back of your hand too. You got some battle scars there.
Oh yeah, I
So,
mean,
somebody's
this
been
this
working
wasn't
on a
from
car.
fighting off ice goons. This was from fighting with my Trans Am. Interestingly, the most difficult part of the job of replacing my car's original automatic with a manual transmission hasn't been taking the old transmission out, putting in the clutch, the flywheel, all that stuff. It was getting in the new brake and clutch pedal in replacement of the original automatic brake pedal. Because that thing, if you've ever done a job like this, like getting up underneath the dashboard of a car to a bracket that was never meant to be touched after the car was built, and trying to get your hand on a little nut, and then your other hand on the other end of that so that it doesn't turn together so that you can turn the one out. Oh my gosh, it took me almost 3 days of going out there, not continuously, but I would go out there and wrestle with it for an hour and finally get so exasperated and defeated that I gave up, went back inside, did something else, and then the next day I tried again. But I finally got it out. So the new pedals are in, and I'm getting close now. Really, I just have to save up the pennies to get myself the shifter linkage for the transmission, which I have to install on the transmission before I put the transmission in. But I'm pretty close.
Okay, so there's a GoFundMe somewhere that should be able to help you out here.
Well, there isn't really, but if people want to, I do have a little donate button at EP Autos, and anything that people want to throw at me for this project would be, of course, much appreciated.
And this actually is a nice way to segue into something that I found absolutely hilarious. Um, you probably have heard that a lot of folks at the Washington Post saw their positions eliminated, and I'm not trying to dance on their graves. Yeah, they're unemployed and facing uncertainty, but this is happening across mainstream media in so many places, and you know, independent voices like yours, you really do sing for your supper. You work for every dime that you get, and it's a function of the market and not just well, you've landed a salaried position, and so you write what the bosses tell you to write and so forth. I don't know if you saw this. Seth Dillon from the Babylon Bee actually had a tweet the other day that said, if your position at the Washington Post was recently eliminated, please consider applying to write for the Babylon Bee. We are seeking applicants experienced in writing fictional content presented in the tone and style of a legitimate news organization.
That's great, except those people aren't very funny. Their writing is turgid, political, ideological. And you're right. I think one of the great benefits of our time is that there is still a connection. People like you and I who do sing for our supper, we have this direct relationship with our audience, with the people who are interested in what we have to say and who think that it's generally worth throwing a few shekels our way every once in a while. I worked in the mainstream media once, a long, long time ago, and I can testify to the arrogant attitude. They think that they're like the solons, the receivers of wisdom to transmute it to the idiot masses out there, and they do have contempt for the masses. Again, I know these people. I've interacted with them on a personal level. They're very haughty. They're very all knowing, and think that that the idiots out there are just to be manipulated and used and directed, and they'll laugh at them behind their back. I mean, I've personally witnessed this. So I don't think, I normally am not somebody who dances on people's graves, but I do believe in accountability and consequences. And the mainstream media has gotten to be so divorced from reality, objectivity, and just basic fairness. And people are tired of it. So yeah, they lost their jobs for the same reason that an electrician who couldn't wire and kept burning the house down, after a while, maybe he'd have a tough time finding people who are willing to pay him to do electrical work on their house.
Right, right. Now, speaking of those who view the citizenry with contempt, let's talk about Gavin Newsom. You alerted to that as we opened with the masking versus unmasking. Bring me up to speed on this. Newsom kind of distinguished himself by forcing masks on everybody during COVID, but apparently his attempt to unmask ICE agents
Yeah.
has now been shot down.
It's very funny in the sense of an evil clown show. As you say, during COVID, Newsom was one of the most strident pushers of maskers on people who did not want to wear them. And now, he's been attempting to unmask the ICE goons who are strutting around on American streets, and a federal court slapped him down and said, "No, you can't do that." But the thing is, there's just this fundamental dishonesty there. It's not that he's opposed to masks; he's opposed to the federal ICE goons. He's not opposed to his goonery. You got to recall that during the pandemic, he sicked the state law enforcement on people who refused to comply with the mask edicts. So, it's just catering to his political base, which is anti anything having to do with any consequences for the illegal aliens. And mind you, I'm not somebody who wants to attack people just because they're here and don't have their papers. I understand it's a problem, and it has to be dealt with. But at the same time, I don't like masked goons walking around on the streets attacking people. There needs to be accountability. If you can't see their face, you don't know who they are. And that's profoundly wrong in a country that's supposed to be a country where the rule of law obtains. Because after all, if there's something that goes awry, there's an incident where one of these guys does something that's clearly illegal, how do you even determine who he was in order
Right.
to hold that person accountable? That's wrong. And I'm sorry if they're afraid for their safety. Oh, we might get doxxed. People might know. Too bad. Then don't do that job. We're on the one hand constantly told that they're heroes. They're heroes. And if you're a hero, if you've got some balls, frankly, well, then show some. Don't be such a timorous little quaking butterfly that you can't dare to show your face in public. Because what are you, embarrassed about your job? Do your job with your face showing in a forthright manner, and let's find out exactly who's who.
It also brings to mind, government that is legitimately operating in the interest of the people doesn't need to hide what it's doing. It can do what it's doing openly because its number one goal is to serve the people, and by serve them I mean protect their natural rights and see that justice prevails. I'm kind of paraphrasing Frederick Bastiat, but that's why we have government in the first place. That's its legitimate purpose. But when you start allowing things to be done in secret, whether it's hiding the identity of the enforcers or whether it's just black operations that no one can know about, trust me, you'll sleep better if you don't know what we're doing. That's how you get a national security state. That's how you
Absolutely.
get an apparatus that protects the system at the expense of the citizenry, which appears to be where we are today.
Isn't it striking that you and I are constantly lectured? Well, if you got nothing to hide, that's thrown in
Yeah.
our faces all the time. And if you drive around in a car with slightly tinted windows in many states, they'll pull you over for that because they can't see you, they don't know what you're up to. But somehow it's a problem if we as citizens can see what they're up to, even to the extent now of just standing there, many many yards away from whatever they're doing, filming them. And I've seen a couple of things go up on YouTube. And again, I can't confirm the facts. I just, scroll through these videos sometimes, of people being assaulted because they were just filming. They weren't doing anything. They were just, holding these people accountable by doing a video documentary record of what was going on. There should not be a problem with that. If they're not ashamed of what they're doing, if they're not afraid that people might see that and go, that's a little sketchy, then we got a problem.
Here, here. I'm with you on that. Let's see what else to talk about. I mentioned this to you before. The we opened up the mics, but there's a video out there that is going viral, and I'll just say right up front, this is a very politically sensitive topic. But a young white woman riding on the subway in New York is being absolutely harassed by a group of young black women. And the white girl's just standing there, and you can see her kind of blinking her eyes and looking like, okay, what do I do? Well, she gets off at the stop, she turns around, and as the door closes, she very quietly says the N bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And the subway car just erupts into this frenzy. I mean, literally trying to claw the doors open, screaming, pounding, and presumably they just wanted to get their hands on her so they could tear her to shreds. Um, and I get it. People be like, well, that sounds like a terrible stereotype you're trying to portray there, but that's kind of the point. It is a
Yeah.
terrible stereotype, but stereotypes sometimes have an element of truth, and this is one that showed an ugly truth that very few people seem willing to acknowledge.
Yeah, and the truth is, there's a double standard here because if non-blacks behave this way, there is immediate outcry, and that's good. You shouldn't behave this way. Parents should teach their children to have self-restraint, self-control. Somebody calls you a name, that doesn't give you the excuse to mob attack them and kill them. And this problem besets, unfortunately, I think, the black community. They're not willing as a collective to call out the bad behavior of some of their people. and it makes all of them look bad. And all it does is foment more and more of the same and worse of the same. That's the problem. It's got nothing to do per se with color. It's got to do with ignoring the fact that this is loathsome and awful and cretinous behavior to do this. You don't just mob people. You don't attack people because they happen to be different than you. And even if they insult you, there are other ways to handle it. It doesn't give you the license to tear somebody limb from limb because they throw an insult at you.
Yeah, it makes me sad from the standpoint that the perception out there, because this has gone viral. And so for some people, I'm looking, like Gen Z and Gen Alpha. This is what they see. This is what's portrayed, and it can give that availability bias to where, well, are they all like that? No, most certainly they aren't. Meaning black people. They're not like that. That's the exception. But yeah, the fact that such behavior is caught on video and shared, um, it's a shame because a lot of good people get dragged down with them.
It's a metastasis of this notion that has been pushed out there that because you're black, you have a right to respond violently this way because the whole system is racist. All white people are bad, and therefore anything goes because you're black. You're entitled to do these things. You're entitled to, throw a soda at the person who's manning the drive-through at McDonald's. If they diss you, this sort of activity, and when that's not policed, and I mean policed by parents and by the culture, and people don't say, you don't do that. That's, gosh, we're starting to show our age. I guess we're getting old, but it was like vulgar, low class behavior, right? It wasn't even a race thing. When you and I were growing up, it was just understood that only trashy people behave that way, irrespective of their color. And most people were taught by their parents, you don't do this sort of stuff, and if you do it, we're going to condemn you. It's wrong. Don't behave like an animal. And if you behave like an animal, we're going to call you out for behaving like an animal.
There's also that entitlement mentality of I am entitled to respect, or maybe something even beyond respect, reverence or whatever. You should bow your head and avert to eye contact when I walk by. No, if you want to be respected, the secret to doing so is you have to live as a respectable person, behave respectably. And that way you're not demanding respect from people. You command it because a person can't help but respect someone who is being respectful in how they live their life and how they treat the people around them.
100%. Isn't it bizarre that we've arrived at a point in our culture where people expect to be respected because of accidents of birth? What your color is, what your sex is, and then the most crazy thing of all, who you sleep with. Like that's become literally a matter of pride. Like, okay, I've pride in myself because I have sex with that category of people. It truly is an animal level thing. It's not a human thing to take pride in that sort of stuff. Do I take pride that I went to the bathroom an hour ago? I mean, you take pride in your accomplishments, in the things that you have achieved through hard work, not because, oh, I happen to have been born a certain color, or because I happen to sleep with that category of people.
Well, that sounds like your white privilege talking there,
Right.
Eric.
That's what they'll say. Exactly. They'll say, I can only say that because I've been the beneficiary of white privilege all my life.
Yeah, that's by the way, it's not been getting as much here lately. I'm saying this is a guy who still has to get up and work every day and, face the
Where's
grind and
my
the
check, right?
uncertainty.
Exactly. I
I
know.
thought life was supposed to be simpler than this. Somehow I seem to have missed out.
Yeah,
I'm kidding,
100%.
but
Well, it's true. I mean, I don't have a tenured professorship and I'm not on the board of some corporation that gives me a few $100,000 a year because I happen to be, a middle-aged white guy.
here, here. Um, I know we've talked about Trump the last few weeks as we visited. I don't want to just beat the drum and say, well, what has he done this time? It's interesting. They had the national prayer breakfast last week,
Yep.
and I really believe the influence of religion on a society can be a very positive thing. And I'm hearkening back to George Washington and his farewell address, and he said, "Hey, religion is one of those indispensable supports for a society. Not when it's codified with government and it's enforced. You will go to church." But when it's something that people carry within their hearts, and that's kind of their guiding star, um, you have a better society. If you need to teach morality to large groups of people, that's a good way to do it. But I start to get a little bit nervous sometimes when I see the national prayer breakfast and promises from the president, we're going to make this one nation under God again. And I think that's something, if it was to happen, it should happen independent of government, not
Well,
because of it.
it's so transparently manipulative of this man. The idea that he can be accepted as some kind of Christian avatar of good conduct, I don't even know what to say about that. He's probably among the most irreligious people ever. And as they say in religious terminology, look at the fruit. Look at what he is and what he's done in life and what he's doing right now. And look at the callousness with which the Israeli government now concedes that something like 70,000 people have been killed in Gaza. It's probably a
Wow.
lot more than that, but they openly concede 70,000 people. And to put that in some context, during the entire course of the 12 years of the Vietnam War, total American casualties, 54,000. It's obscene. And this is being done because, and again, I'm not saying it was at all. I'm not saying that what happened on October, whatever the date was a good thing. But what was it? 1,700 people were killed during that event. So that somehow justifies the wholesale mass murder of 70,000 people. And Christians say that this is, some Christians, some of these Zionist evangelical Christians, are looking aside. They don't care that a lot of those are just women and children, old people who had nothing to do with October the 7th. They just happened to be
Yep.
there. And they're being killed, and they're being deliberately killed and deliberately targeted, not because they're sniping at the IDF, just because they happen to be there. It's an obscenity.
It's one of the reasons why, as we always point out, I think each week, you have to be committed to thinking independent of whatever the media, whichever media you prefer, whether it's Fox News or whether it's CNN. You've got to be thinking independent of whatever narrative they happen to be pushing, because the Gaza narrative is not something that's being reported on accurately. In fact, there's a lot of money and effort being expended to make sure that people aren't looking too closely. And if you do look a little too closely, well, then you will be
Right.
branded an anti-Semite.
Right. And at the same time that that's being ignored, Trump is just endlessly talking about the protesters in Iran. A lot of that is contrived too. But a couple thousand people apparently have been hurt or killed as a result of what's going on over there. Somehow Trump is crocodile tearing about those poor people because he wants to attack Iran, obviously. But all these women and children, tens of thousands of them, ongoing. Who cares about them? That's a matter of no concern. I don't see. I mean, I'm kind of a heathen. I don't see how any Christian man cannot be troubled by that.
Well, and even look at I didn't watch the Super Bowl. I'm going to confess. I had
Amen.
better things to do. But the fact that there were two different halftime, performances, there's some pretty interesting division. And I'm not ripping on Kid Rock for doing this, but the TPUSA halftime show was more of a religious kind of thing, whereas I guess the mainstream one, depending on whether or not you speak or understand Spanish, was quite the hedonistic orgy of words and song.
There was a great meme I saw. I'll send it to you after we get off the air. The top picture says, "Daddy, who won the Super Bowl?" And the one below it is those who didn't watch it.
Oh, I love it. And I agree. It was, yeah, we visited family. We did things that were productive. We cooked dinner together, and it was, wow. There wasn't a football game, but somehow we got by.
Yeah,
All right.
I worked on my Trans Am.
There you go. And I want to end on a car related note, since after all, Eric is the Eric Peters of Eric Peters Autos. Talk to me. You had an article about, is it crazy to buy a salvage title car?
Yeah, yeah.
And my son happens to have one that is a salvage title car. Been a great little Ford Focus, still running, just, but what are some of the things you have to consider if you buy something that has that salvage title?
Well, you have to do due diligence because, in some cases, a salvage title is issued when a vehicle is considered to be unrepairable. Now, that can happen for a variety of reasons. Some of them are consequential, some not necessarily. A consequential reason would be, if it had been flood damage, you definitely don't want to buy a car that's been in a flood, particularly a modern car, because of all the electronics. Water gets into those things. That's the last thing you want. No deal is good enough to buy a flood damaged modern car. On the other hand, if you're talking about an older vehicle, 8, 9, 10 years old, let's say, that got into a relatively minor accident and the airbags went off, the driver and passenger airbag went off, but the vehicle is structurally sound. It just has cosmetic damage. and the airbags need to be replaced. Well, the insurance company is more than likely going to total that car because the cost of repairing that damage exceeds a threshold, typically 50% of the book value of the car. So what a lot of people will do is say, I know my car is a good car. I'd like to keep it. I'd like to fix it. So they'll buy it back. Now it's a salvage title at this point, and they'll repair it themselves. And in some states, you can get away with not fixing the airbags. Who cares? It doesn't have anything to do with whether the car is operable and functional. And they can save themselves a lot of money that way. And you could buy a car, at an auction that has been declared salvage for just that reason and fix it up yourself and save a lot of money. Now, the downside is, generally speaking, the record of that salvage title will come up on, like if somebody does a Carfax or something. So if you care about the trade-in value, the resale value of the car, you probably don't want to do it because you will probably get a lot less money for a car that has a salvage title. On the other hand, if you're just looking for a vehicle that you want to drive it, until it falls apart and you throw it away,
Right.
there's no
Right.
reason not to do that. You can save a lot of money doing that.
Love it. That's hey, we're all trying to get by, and everything's more expensive. But if you're considering something like this, you should check out the article on Eric's website, ericpetersautos.com. Eric, great as always to visit with you. Looking forward to our conversation next Tuesday.
Me too. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.